Despite being a longtime Sega Saturn fan, I came to love the Nintendo 64 quite a bit. I got to play it a bit early thanks to an acquaintance I knew who worked for the Babbage's game store. He imported the console and Super Mario 64 at the Japanese launch. After it hit the US and got some games under its belt, it really came into its own and became one of my favorites. Since the Nintendo 64 didn't see a ton of releases, it supplemented my Sega Saturn importing quite nicely. By the time the Nintendo 64 really got going, the Saturn was slowing down considerably, which helped my finances quite a bit. In the years that followed, I began collecting some of my favorites, a fine group of games I still own today. While looking over my gaming shelf the other day, I got to thinking about what my favorite titles for it were. It was that thinking that eventually led to the video you are about to see. I have chosen a top 10 of personal favorite Nintendo 64 games, along with a few honorable mentions. It goes without saying that a list like this is always going to be subjective, and it's entirely for your entertainment. Don't take it personally, and enjoy the show. We start our journey by bringing up a few honorable mentions that missed the top 10, but I still really enjoyed. Among those was Wave Race 64, a Nintendo-developed jet ski racer that had some spectacular visuals. That wasn't all it was, because the analog-based gameplay was something special as well. It controlled so smoothly, had a solid number of courses, time of day changes, and the choppiness of the waves really affected your path. A GameCube sequel would come, but this was always my favorite one. Star Wars Rogue Squadron also makes our honorable mentions. This flight combat game was a beauty as well, which was bolstered by the RAM pack that allowed a higher resolution than you typically saw for the platform. You would carry out missions in various Star Wars fighters battling the Empire across numerous environments. It was tough, but I loved the look and feel of its presentation. It really did feel like it was part of the Star Wars universe. Mario Tennis was a pick up and play winner as well. I dropped a ton of hours into mastering the gameplay and don't regret a single minute of it. I really enjoyed the way it incorporates the idea of special stages that have different effects on the gameplay, like the tilting Bowser level. It really was as addictive as games can get. Excitebike 64 gets a nod as well. You don't see this one often on lists like this, and that's a shame, because it deserves some attention. Loads of secrets, different bikers to choose, and gameplay that's a blast from the moment you pick up the controller. It was tough to leave it out of my top 10. The same could be said of Resident Evil 2. I know this was a port, but Capcom pulled off a miracle releasing this on a cartridge. It also uses the RAM pack, so it runs in high resolution mode and looks outstanding. The video was a bit rough and the sound effects were compressed, but I still think this was well worth playing on the Nintendo 64. Our final honorable mention is GoldenEye 007. This first-person shooter had some of the best mission-based objectives I've ever played. Many of them were optional and it made for some outstanding replay value. The gunplay was fun as well, which in turn made it a great multiplayer experience. It would have been number 11 on my list if it had gone up that far. We start our countdown with number 10, the incredible on-rail shooter Star Fox 64. This was the sequel to the Super Nintendo Classic, now with a new coat of textured mapping and vastly improved models thanks to the power of Nintendo's 5th generation hardware. This appealed to me on the same level as something like Panzer Dragoon. Its showpiece software meant to dazzle you with great environments, a flashy presentation, and having a pick-up-and-play ease that made it very easy to get into. Star Fox 64 wasn't just a retread with pretty visuals. It added a new free roaming mode when fighting bosses that allowed you to go anywhere within the arena. There was also a new tank vehicle that was used during ground missions that really changed up the action. When it comes right down to it, Star Fox 64 was just a good game. It was fun, challenging, and made you want to come back and play it again. It was arcade action elevated by Nintendo's impeccable game design. For me, this series hit its high point right here. number 9 is Sin and Punishment, another on-rail shooter, but this one felt nothing like Star Fox. This one was played on foot from a third-person perspective. You could jump, strafe, and choose whether to auto-aim your shots or use a free mode and aim where you wanted to. There was even melee attacks to deal damage up close and personal. It felt like you had so much more control over the character, more than you typically did in these types of games. The developers at Treasure worked closely with Nintendo to craft an excellent adventure here, made all the better by a 2-player co-op mode. Unfortunately, this stayed in development for 3 years and didn't see a release until late 2000 in Japan. It was not a huge success commercially, and Nintendo did not bring it to its Western Nintendo 64 markets. I wouldn't play it until a while later myself, but when I did, I felt that Treasure magic immediately.
Here already?
In 1999, Nintendo released Mario Golf on the Nintendo 64. Mario had not been a stranger to sports games before, but few ever were as fun as this one. I had been a fan of Neo Turf Masters before this, and this was as close as any 3D sports game had gotten to that level of pick-up-and-play appeal. That appeal was bolstered by its great-looking 3D graphics and a number of characters from the Mario universe. Also, like Neo Turf Masters, there was a hidden element of extreme skill involved. You could just bash the ball and play things simple, or you could finesse the hit to make the ball curve or spin back on itself for some pretty incredible shots. Add in timeless multiplayer, Game Boy Color transfer pack support, and a couple of mini-games, and you have what was and still is one of the best games of video game golf to this very day. It was developed by Camelot Software Planning, the same company that had done many of the shining titles for Sega. They also did Hot Shots Golf for Sony, no doubt a great learning experience to give us this classic here. Camelot would go on to do many more games for Nintendo, thanks to the quality of this title.
Nice on!
During the 1980s and 90s, I was a fan of professional wrestling. That led me to play and enjoy a number of video games based on the product. As good as some of those were, wrestling titles were never as incredible as they were on this machine. The Nintendo 64 was a titan in this regard, thanks to the AKI and ASMIC relationship that begot numerous titles over the console's life. This wrestling engine had begun all the way back with Japan's Virtual Pro Wrestling and evolved substantially, incorporating new features, new licenses, and 4-player matches. No Mercy here was released in 2000 when the WWF product was still on fire, and it's full of some of your favorites from the Attitude Era. It's the gameplay of this beast that stands the test of time, however. From something as simple as locking up with your opponent to throwing them out the ring, WWF No Mercy just feels right. Every button is in the right place, every move second nature, every match its own orchestra of mayhem. The moves list is extensive, the customization was deep. I dare say it's just about as perfect as a video game can depict sports entertainment. Many games have emulated its features, many have tried to recapture its magic, few have come close. Number 6 will come as a surprise if you know my feelings on the original. I despise the original Super Nintendo Mario Kart. I hated the gameplay, I hated the split-screen visuals. My friends loved it, but I couldn't stand it. When Mario 64 was released in 1997, I had such bad memories of the Super Nintendo game, I didn't want anything to do with it. My buddy Nathan got it and I was won over instantly. Yeah, that rubber banding AI was still complete BS, but the tracks and combat felt so good I didn't care. It also happened to play incredible with a group of friends. There was a ton to do on all the tracks, different speed settings, and the cups to compete in. The sound and visuals were pretty spectacular as well. It didn't have that oppressive layer of fog that smothered most Nintendo 64 racing games, and the performance always seemed to stay consistent. It all just had an appeal that I felt was missing in the original, and it remains one of my favorite versions of this franchise even now. Games like this saved this platform in the West, and it remains infinitely replayable today. As good as old Mario Kart 64 was, 1998's F-Zero X is easily the best racing game on the platform. It's true the graphics can be rather simplistic, particularly the textures and models, but it runs at a blistering pace that makes the gameplay feel incredible. You are bouncing around a track with 29 other vehicles hanging on for dear life. It's barely controlled chaos and it feels wonderful. The new moves you have at your disposal allow you a measure of offensive and defensive strategy, and with so many competitors on the track, you need to learn to take care of yourself pretty quickly. It doesn't take much to send your ass careening to your doom, thanks to a track design that threatens you at every turn. The challenge is considerable, but time and practice will give you the confidence to face its harder cups. Beating all it has to offer is a lot easier said than done, however. Number 4 here is gonna surprise some of you, but I consider it one of the unsung heroes of the platform. Pilotwings 64 was a launch title and one of my most played games that entire generation. It was a rare mix of relaxation and challenge, held together by a fun factor that never let up. Sometimes I was in the mood to just fly around and take pictures. Sometimes I just wanted to negotiate obstacles. And sometimes I just wanted to load myself into a giant cannon and blast myself across the map. There's an abstruse quality to its variety, a flight simulator that often has you doing things no other game in the genre would dare. Each map is an open world where you can just fly around and explore if that's all you wish, or you can do things like battle a giant in your gyrocopter, or jump around using spring-loaded shoes. It's a video game that's a vacation from video games. There's a freedom and imagination here that, if you can appreciate it, provides an experience that is still quite unique. It's a shame Nintendo doesn't revisit this concept more often. Games like this are what make Nintendo consoles special. I was a tremendous fan of the original Legend of Zelda game for the NES. At the time, there was nothing like it that I had played before, and it was insanely popular among my friends and classmates. As much as I loved that, Part 2 and A Link to the Past really didn't grab me the same way. I knew ACarina of Time was going to be something special from the moment I first saw it, however. Released in late 1998, this three-dimensional update to the Zelda formula was an absolute treasure of game design. Fully fleshed out game worlds were still in their infancy at this point, and Nintendo did a bang-up job bringing Hyrule to life with polygons. The lock-on mechanics made the gameplay incredibly easy to pick up, and the game designers gave you plenty to do with collectibles, dungeons, and items to find. The world itself was a bit empty of life, but the different areas had personality, and it made a hell of an impression. I would spend hours searching every nook for its secrets, and when it was over, it was one of the rare occasions I'd replay an adventure title all over again. Breath of the Wild would eventually supplant it as my favorite in the series, but this one will always be something special. My number 2 pick is a big one, and I stand behind it 100%. WCW NWO Revenge was a revelation for the genre. Growing up in Virginia, I was a big fan of Jim Crockett Promotions, and by extension, the WCW product that was born from it. This one is here because of the nostalgia for the brand, but also the quality of the product. A wrestling game had never felt so right. From the grappling to the strikes to the power moves and finishers, Revenge put on a clinic of how sports entertainment should be handled in video game form. Like No Mercy, this was a spin-off of a prior product, a sequel to WCW vs NWO World Tour, but it improves everything about that experience. There are now over 60 wrestlers, all the championship belts, entrances, that awesome battle royal, costume edits, TV-accurate arenas, and more weapons than you can shake a stop sign at. What made the AKI-developed wrestling game so special was the attention to detail and the fabulous grappling system. Every move was easy to pull off, and you had full control over how you positioned your foe, which led to even more moves that were possible. No Mercy was incredible, but WCW had a stretch of time that it was some of the best wrestling I had ever seen, and this game captures it perfectly. Video game sports entertainment hasn't been the same since. My top choice is here because there is no game on this platform that captured the Nintendo 64 experience better than Super Mario 64. This was a launch game that felt like the entire console was designed around it. The hardware right down to the controller itself. Mario's gameplay had always had a healthy dose of finesse to it thanks to running, jumping, momentum, and how each of those affected one another. That translated to 3D like a champ, and Nintendo's controller felt like a natural extension of your every desire. Once you got good at it, Mario would turn on a dime and was capable of some pretty incredible acrobatics. The developers knew they had something special and kept the objectives around it extremely simple. Stages are basically obstacle courses to collect stars. There's no convolution beyond that to drag it down. Go in, explore the area, and negotiate its puzzle-like roadblocks to score the star. It was so simple but so fun, and the replay value was sky high. Honestly, this series never got any better than this for me. Nintendo would take the fundamentals and add gimmicks to future entries, but they never felt as interesting or as fun as they did here. Nintendo's transition from 2D sprites and backgrounds to 3D polygons was an unabashed success, and it began right here with its bread and butter. To this day, I remain thoroughly impressed by the success of the Nintendo 64. While it's true it was still crushed by the unstoppable PlayStation juggernaut, it went on to sell over 30 million hardware units worldwide, with software sales that often had an incredible attach rate. Super Mario 64 itself would sell 10 million units, for example, a number that competed with the best from Sony and its third parties. Nintendo had come out with a cartridge-based console at a time when CD technology was the industry standard, and they had weathered that decision by making sure their software was top-notch. Of course, not everything was a success. Third-party support suffered terribly at this time, which led to deficiencies in the library that were never addressed. It made owning a Nintendo 64 a bit of an acquired taste. It was a great companion to other consoles if you could afford it, or it was pretty fantastic on its own if you loved the stuff Nintendo made, or you were deeply into multiplayer titles. Being a Sega fan, one thing I appreciated about Nintendo's offerings was that they were often entirely different from what Sega made. If you owned a Saturn at the time, the Nintendo 64 had a game library that was quite a bit different, and that made owning them both a great time. Of course, Nintendo ran their businesses a lot better than Sega, which guaranteed their survival through the tough times. But that is another story. I'm Sega Lord X. Thank you guys for watching, and I will catch you next time.